Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I hope everyone's doing okay. I want to really thank you guys for coming in and sitting in on this presentation. I hope everyone's doing well today. And what we're going to be learning today is how to create a complicated form such as a bell tower cupola. And this could be for a historic element that you need for a project that you don't necessarily have any drawings for. It can be created from an AutoCAD drawing or a picture. A little bit about myself. So my name is Angela Norris. I'm a licensed architect. I am a senior architecture building technical specialist with ATG. I have been in the architecture AEC industry for about 25 years and first started using Revit in 2006. I have worked on many different types of projects from large scale to small renovation projects, done a lot of historic work, and a lot of these have been taken from the phases from schematic design to construction documents and as far as even design development. So going to the next slide. The agenda today is going to use the Revit family editor to create a complicated form such as the bell tower cupola. How we're going to do this is we are going to use the really cool tools such as extrusions, blends, revolves, sweeps, and void forms. This is a slide to show some of the different historic pictures and drawings of some famous cupolas, such as the bell tower at in London and many other ones that and as you can tell, some of these are very complicated shapes to use. So let's ring the bell and let's get started with the presentation. And if you could please hold off on your questions to the very end, that will help me to finish through the demonstration and then we'll go through what you have. So the first step we want to do is under File, we're going to create a new family type. From your pull-down menu, select Generic Model. First step is to insert either an image that you would have that you could scale to use. For this demonstration, I'm going to import a CAD drawing. I'm going to begin with inserting the floor plan. And then I'm going to go to the front view and import the elevation. Slide this over so it's more readable. And I'm going to insert the CAD drawing for the elevation again because this cupola is symmetrical. Now you can take a look at this in 3D and see that the floor plan and the elevations show up here. So as we create this geometric form for the cupola, we can monitor and see our progress on what we've created. So from the front view, I'm going to begin with creating reference planes. I'm going to create a reference plane for the first base. I'm going to call this base left. Here, I'm going to call it base right. In my left view, I'm going to create another reference plane to call it base back. Slide this out of the way so we can see a little better. Base front. I'm going to go back to the front view and create the horizontal reference plane needed for each level of the cupola. I'm going to start with this one and give it the name base top 1. This is going to be called base top 2. Column base. Column top. And roof. The next thing that I find is easy to do to make it simpler is to dimension these reference planes so that I will know what the heights are for the extrusion and blends that I'm going to create. I'm going to move these dimensions out so that I can see what those are. So our first base will be 8 inches, second base will be 8 inches, and then our top base will be 6 inches. So let's get started creating the geometric forms for this cupola. From the reference level, you can see the reference plane that were created so that I can see where that base is going to be. So from the ribbon, select the Create tab and Extrusion. I'm going to use the rectangle under Draw tab, and I'm going to make a rectangle for that base. And I know from the dimension that I created here that I have a height of 8 inches. So I can go ahead and put 8 inches here. I also want to create a void in this extrusion. Let me trim up these lines. So it has an opening, and this opening could be for if you needed to access the bell for maintenance, you would be able to put a ladder in and have the ability to have that. So that is what, so far, what we've built. I'm going to change this to shaded so we can see where we are as we build the cupola. Back to the reference level, I want to create the sweep that goes around the base. So from here, under the Create tab, we're going to create a sweep and sketch the path. Check to make sure you're on the right work plane, which we want this to be on reference level. Select OK. Now we're going to pick lines. It's important when you are sketching your path to think about where you want that profile to be created so that when we get up here for these angled areas, you don't want to do that on angle view because your elevations are basic back, front, left, and right. So this will help alleviate any odd geometric locations to where you would not be able to see where the profile is that you need to be created. So from that, I'm going to go to the front view. I want to finish the edit mode for the path. And here is your horizontal and vertical axis of where you're going to draw your profile. You can also preload profiles if you have these that you wanted to use by pulling down a loaded profile. But for this exercise, I'm going to draw my profiles from the AutoCAD underlay that I have. Let's simply just trace over your lines from the AutoCAD background. Finish edit mode. One more time. We can check in 3D, and there's our suite. Now what we want to create is a blend that goes from this point to here. And this is a three-dimensional blend, as you can see from our AutoCAD import drawing. So to do that, on our reference level, create a blend. First thing we want to do is create another rectangle. It goes from this point to this point because we are going to be blending up. And we are going to pick lines, hover and tab, and from our front elevation, we also see that this is 8 inches in height. So my reference level, I can change this to 8 inches. This is actually the top. So I need to delete that out. So now we're going to edit the top, and it follows along this geometric form. And I need to edit that top again. It should really be along this plane. That's the good thing about having the AutoCAD background here so that you can see that the lines did not line up correctly and I needed to move the top so that it lines up correctly with my base. And we also need to edit the work plane instead of reference level to be base top 1 and select OK. So now we have the blend created, and the next part of this exercise is to make a void form to cut a hole in our blend. That is done by create void extrusion. I'm going to pick the lines for where I want this void to be. I'm going to check my reference plane to put it on base top 1. And it is going to be 8 inches in depth, which is the depth of the blend. Say OK. Cut the geometry. Here, let's check it in 3D. So there is our void cut out for the blend. Now we're going to create the next base and its profile. From the reference level, create extrusion. We're going to set this reference plane to be base top 2 and say OK. Pick lines, hover, select all, and it is 6 inches in height from our dimension. And I want to also cut this out. Finish edit mode. Let's check this one in 3D. And there's our second base. I'm going to next create the sweep that goes around that extrusion. Create, sweep, sketch path. Make sure it's set on the correct level. Hover and tab. Finish the path. Let's go to the front view. And here we can edit the profile by sketching over our AutoCAD base. Finish edit mode. Click one more time. Check in 3D. So there we have our base completed. Now for the fun part is to create the columns. And we have 8 of these. We're going to start that with creating another extrusion. This time, I'm going to put it on a work plane called column base. These are the work planes that we created in the beginning. So these will give you the levels for which extrusion or blend you need to create. I'm going to pick lines here, tab through, and from the front elevation with the dimension, it is 4 feet 8 inches tall. So I'm going to change the depth here to 4 feet 8 inches tall and select OK. And as you can see in the 3D, that is the start of our column. So we want to add this detailing. Those will be done with sweeps as well. So back to the reference level, I'm going to create a sweep, set the work plane for column base. I'm going to sketch the path around the column using pick lines. Finish editing our sketch path, select OK. From the front view, we can now create the profiles by tracing and drawing along our AutoCAD background. Now this column, I want to create all profiles in the same sweep so that these will move and can be grouped together with the column. Finish edit mode, complete it. Let's take a look at it in 3D. The next part I want to do is select both elements, and you can check in 3D that they're all selected. We're going to create a group and call it column. From the reference level, I'm going to array these columns around the octagon, and that is done with the array command, and it's going to be radial. I need 8 of them. I'm going to place the center of rotation here and array it along that dimension. Let's take a look in 3D, and there are all of our columns. So the next part I want to create is this mass here. So for reference level, we're going to create another extrusion. This time set the work plane for column top. Hover and tab, hover and tab, and I want to check what the height is for this extrusion, and it's 4.2. Finish edit mode, and there's our extrusion. Now we need to create the profile for the roof. So from the reference level, I'm going to create another sweep by sketching the path along this extrusion. And I want to set this one, before I go any further, to the roof level. Tab through for my sketch. And that, as you can see, you don't want that on an angle. So I'm going to go to this side since I want to edit the profile from the front view. Like so. From the front view, now I can create that sweep by tracing again over my AutoCAD background. And if you have trouble finding a point, you can tab and it will catch it. Finish edit mode. And we can see how that is starting to come along in 3D. Now, I want to go ahead before I add the detail along this mass to create the dome. That is created in a similar way as what we did for the previous sweeps. Now this time I am not able to see where this reference plane needs to be because the dome needs to go along the outer edge of that profile. So what I will do is come to reference level, and under your extents box, you can edit the view range. I'm going to set this at 30 feet, a cut plane at 15 feet, and say OK. It's also helpful to put this on hidden line so that now you can see what the outline of your sweep is for our dome that we're going to create. I'm going to do this with another sweep. Set the work plane to roof and sketch the path. Hover and tab. That will give me the point where I want to sketch the profile. Edit profile. It will tell me to go to the front view and open that view. So for the curves, I'm going to use the spline to trace over from the AutoCAD background the curves. Tab to get that point. And here with these points, you can smooth this up a little bit to get it a little bit more in line to match your sketch. And that looks pretty good. Need to close the boundary. Finish edit mode. Finish edit mode again. And there's the dome. For the next elements, for the finial and the spire, we're going to do it in the front elevation. And those are created by using the revolve. The first thing we need to do is set our axis line. We're going to revolve these geometric forms around this point. Create the boundary line by the draw command. Trace over the AutoCAD drawing. Close the boundary. Select OK. And there is the revolve. From the front tab, we've got 2 more to create around this axis point. You also want to check and make sure you're on the center front back so that it will be on the center of the dome. And we are going to create for the boundary line the circle from here to here. Close the loop and select OK. And there's our ball. Last piece that we need to create for our spire is here. We're going to revolve it around the same axis. Boundary line is from the top to the bottom. Close the loop. Select OK. So now we have the basic elements of the cupola created. Now we need to add the detail and cut out the arch openings. So those will be done by creating another extrusion for the keystone and a void here. The first part that I'm going to do is create a void extrusion. And instead of having a reference, since I don't have a reference plane for where this is located, I'm going to pick a plane. Now, this is in wireframe currently, but to make sure I'm on the correct line for the extrusion, I find that it's helpful to switch this to hidden line. Now I can select that. Switch back to wireframe so that I have my AutoCAD background to trace for the opening. This has a depth of 1 foot. Cut the geometry. And then let's look at that in 3D. There's our opening. I'm going to next create the keystone elements. Those are done again with extrusion. I'm going to make sure that my work plane is still set on the same extrusion that was selected for the void. Say OK. And trace over the lines in the AutoCAD background. Close our boundary. And set our depth. For this, I'm going to make it 1 inch in depth. See how this looks in 3D. So there we have that. For this, to make it simple to array around the octagon, I'm going to create this as a group and call it keystone arch here. And I'm going to go back to the reference plane and change my view range again to 5 feet so that when I select the group, I will be able to see where that element is. I'm going to array that with a number of 8, place my center of rotation here, and I'm going to array it from this point to this point. Check it in 3D, and there are all of our cutout voids for the arches and the keystones. Now the final thing we can do is to begin to assign materials to these elements. So I want to make this a different material. And under materials and finishes, it defaults to a by category. And as you can see from default from the family template, you're not really given a lot. So we're going to create a new material. I'm going to call this copper. And once the material is created, we're going to go to Appearance and change its asset from the color of just gray to give it an actual material that we want. And you can do this one of 2 ways. You can type in the search bar for the material you want, or you can pull down under the Appearance library to select from a host of different materials that you can select from. And this one, I know I want it to look like copper. And I'm going to choose the patina. replace the asset that's currently in the default to this. Select OK. Change my graphic display to realistic. I want this element to also be copper, and Revit will default to the last material that was used. So I'm going to say OK. For my trim elements, I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to rename it to paint white. Replace the asset. And I'm going to choose enamel glossy white. This is a preview that shows you what that material is going to look like. I also want this and this to have the same material. It defaults back to the one you last selected and say OK. Now I'm going to give this a color, create a new material, rename. I'm going to call this one paint ivory. Replace its asset under the search, paint ivory. And I'm going to choose flat. And there is the paint color. And I'm going to give these, by editing the group, a material. I want that to also be ivory. While I'm in the edit group mode, I'm going to change the material here to white. Finish the group editor mode. And now all my columns are painted ivory to match the mass. Next, I'm going to edit the keystone so that it has a material with edit group. Select the keystone, change the material to white, finish. And now all of our keystones are painted white. The last elements that I want to create materials for is Finial and Spire. So I'm going to go back to my materials dialog box, create a new material, rename it. For this, I'm going to make it aluminum. Appearance, replace the asset, search, aluminum, and I'm going to pick polished. Here's the preview for what that's going to look like and say OK. And here's a cool trick because I know that I want this color and this color to be the same. So I can join this element and this element together. And what that does is when I change the material type to aluminum, it's going to change both. The final piece is we want to load the bell for the bell tower. To do this, I have a pre-created bell that's already done, and I'm going to go to the component, and it's going to tell me that I do not have one loaded, and if I want to load one now, I'm going to select yes. It's going to take me to the bell that I will load into the project and place it like so. From the front view, you can see that it automatically defaults to putting on the reference level. If you know what the height is by dimensioning from this to the bottom of the bell, you can set it at the right place one of two ways. I can either select it, offset from the level 5'4", or I can simply align from the base of the bell in the AutoCAD drawing to the base. And there we have the bell hung. The last thing that I would want to do is delete out my AutoCAD files. These come defaulted as pinned, so you have to unpin them, unpin again, and delete. And that's the final result. Other than if we want to change this category for its material to be a color as well. And I want to add a material to that one too. So that's the final finished result for creating a dome, keystones, void for arches, groups for your columns, and blends. So do you have anyone have any questions? How to make that look easy? Lots of practice. Once you do it a few times, it gets easier and easier. Oh, great. I'm glad you learned several cool things. Thank you, David. And if you need me to run through anything again, I'm happy to do that. If there's something in here you have a question on where maybe I went too quickly, I'm happy to take a step back. Do I have any good ways to model non-uniform curved surfaces? I'm trying to think of an example of what that would be, a non-uniform curved surface. So just something that's not as simple as this dome. It could probably be done with a couple of different sweeps that could be joined together. How would I handle a round object with reference planes? I would use the revolve tool to have an axis point and your reference plane to be the center of the round object. So if we go back and look at how this ball was created, this is your axis line. So if you look at that in 3D, your axis line is on the center line of your cupola. So wherever your round object needs to be, it's going to revolve around the point of axis that you set it for. Does that make sense? such as a multi-radius, something like a swoosh logo. If you have the drawing as a background, you could, would that be more like, that would probably be an extrusion if you have a thickness. Yes, it's going to be recorded and you will be able to play this back to follow along. Yes, the group and arrow tool is very handy. I think I know what you're talking about, Andy. And what you could do, there is a tool where you can use a sweep blend. So for a sweep blend, you would create a profile at one end, hover and watch over the example. You would have a profile that has two separate ends. Create your path and blend. And that could be a circle. If it was two different circles, it would also blend your curves as well. How would you hollow out the dome? I would use a void sweep. And if you like, I could try to demonstrate that. Would you like to see how that would be done? Let's go back to our reference level. Going to, or I mean, the other way you can do it as well, there's a couple of different ways. I simplified it. When you edit the sweep and you edit the profile here, you can simply just offset 1 inch for that and then close up and trim your lines from this point to here. This would be one way. There's two different ways you could do it. If you knew the thickness of what that dome is, it gets a little tricky with this V line. Enter that. So now that is in a void form. If you can kind of tell from the 3D, that would be the void. The other way that you could do that is if you wanted to, instead of editing the thickness of that, you could edit that sweep, select the profile, go back to a solid form, and then create a void under your reference level, which I would change this to a view range where I could see through the void here, and you could create and cut out what that is. Did that answer your question? So there's two different ways you can hollow out the dome. Yes. You can also modify the original dome sweep to show the thickness, which I would think would be easier, especially if you know what the thickness of the dome material is going to be. These are really good questions. Can you cut a section through the object? Yes, you can do that. From the reference level, under the View tab, Section, I wanted to cut one straight through the middle. Go to View, and there's the section. With the sweep, the profiles, extrusion, the bell. And then this can be loaded, since we created this as a family, it can be loaded into your project if you wanted, for example, oh, it's going a little crazy. A mouse. From this first slide, this was a cupola that I created here. And what I did there was created the cupola. We had the base of the masonry structure for the bell tower, and that was created as a family and imported into the model and placed. Are there any more questions? Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, I want to thank you very much for attending this presentation, and I hope that you took away some really good tips and tricks on how to create a complicated geometric form such as a cupola. And again, you can also use an image background. If all you have is a photograph of that cupola, you can insert an image. You can import an image, scale it up to a known dimension that you might have, and trace over it in a very similar way as I did the AutoCAD. The benefit of doing it with an AutoCAD is you've got very easy points to select and snap to, but otherwise you can also create it from an image import. All right, well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.